Hi, it's Fats from Electric and Gaming. Just want to really. Someone's asked me to talk about the generalised decrease in values of items on TF2 and the effects of dead game and all this sort of stuff. um, I've sort of done a rough evaluation of the economy, and I think it's more or less the same size as what it was 2 or 3 years ago when I first started getting into it. If you actually look here, this is a chap, Kenny Smith 63, who's basically talked back at what's happening in 2014. When I tried to open my backpack, there was a message saying installing a big update for the site. And he waited and he waited, and my backpack was 4,336 USD, and now it's 275. I'm a major collector of odd-leveled vintage weapons, and I have approximately 220 collected levels. So in other words, what happened is that the market became biased towards unusual items, and away from collectors and other things. And the same with spelled items, they're never truly valued. In addition to this, the backpack evaluation system has always been flawed. It provides as a guide as to what things can be, but at the end of the day, an item is worth as much as somebody is going to pay for it. And that's why Backpack tries to ask you to substantiate what items are being paid for. Now, there are people like me who are collectors, and if I really want an item, I will probably pay a bit more than the next person. Now, obviously, that goes with with some reservations, because obviously, if something is not what I want, then I won't want it. So I'm not going to pay for it, and other people are not going to pay for it. So I guess at the end of the day, this is a guy saying that there was a serious decrease in backpack values in 2014. Now, it is 2018, as I'm sure you're aware, so that basically means that he was saying that the value is shot to pieces. Now, the backpacks increased, and I think Chickens was 150 something US, and 1,000 US, and now it's 120 or something, and that means the items are actually more in there than what they were. So this means that different values have been attributed to those items. Now, this is, I guess it's not as robust as the gold economy, where gold is worth XYZ because there are numerous sellers as in a free and competitive market. TF2 is not really like that, because TF2 has one of ones, ones of twos. It has people that like to play pyros, people that like to play spies, people who like to collect collectors, people who like to collect a type of unusual, whether it be sunbeams, knife storm, burning flames. So it's not just a straightforward commodity like gold or shares or something which is the same. If you're going to buy 20 unusuals, it's not the same as buying 20 ounces of gold. Effectively, every ounce of gold is the same as another ounce of gold, but every unusual is not the same as an unusual. So that's how it is different. I guess to say, this is what happened in 2014, and people are saying, oh, the economy is going to collapse. And this is what they say here. Why has it dropped? Show me the proof of the price changes. But at the end of the day, if people want his items, they will pay for them if they want them. They will offer money for them if they want them. And that's the way a market economy works. Of course, people have made many different extrapolations. One of them, for example, is this one here, the so-called Chaldean writings about we have fallen upon evil times, and the world has waxed very old and wicked, politics are very corrupt, children no longer respectful of their parents. There's also people who have said, look, oh gosh, is there a 6,000-year-old ancient quote about kids being brats? More or less about the kids not being respectful of the future. How can there be a future like this? I think there are things like that in Egyptian, but I think a lot of them are misquoted and misconstrued. There is a Guardian article here by Tanya Byron from 2009, which says that young people no longer respect their parents, they're rude, impatient, frequently inhabit taverns, and no self-control. and basically, saying that there's no future because children are not respectful, etc. I don't know what the long and short of it all is, but people have made some remarkable claims about what's going to happen. And they are not always right. Russia was going to be conquered on horseback, according to Nostradamus, allegedly. So, what we do know is sometimes that when people start to make economic forecasts, then that can sometimes lead to a spiraling down of economic structures. So people start to say, oh, the economy's bad, don't spend money, don't do this, don't do this. Then that can lead down to a spiraling down. Now, obviously, if people were to leave Team Fortress 2 in large numbers, that would mean that there would be less theoretical demand for items, and therefore it's a supply and demand curve situation. Okay, this is a supply and demand curve if you source them. This shows there's a demand curve here, okay, and demand, and this is price, and this is a number of units required along the x-axis. So if the demand for an item is increased, theoretically the supply will increase, okay. So the price will increase as the supply is constant. Now, obviously, if there's more supply of unusuals, then what will happen is the supply curve will move this way because more are available, and the price will drop as you move down the demand curve. So basically, if the demand lessens, then obviously the curve will move this way. That means the price will be down. As the supply will be, the demand will be less than what the supply is. So this is what determines ultimately the price of unusuals, is whether people are going to pay for them and whether there are enough people out there with money who may put an offer on the unusual, and ultimately it is the maximum offer that people are willing to pay. It's a little bit like the eBay situation. If you are collecting something that's just come out, when you were kids, it might have been the Shopkins or My Little Pony or frickin' Matchbox cars, I don't know, and that's the latest and the greatest, and everyone wants it, but only so many are made. Oh my god, I want that, my kid wants that, blah 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 blah. Okay, so you're prepared to pay a little bit more because it's something that's really wanted, or maybe it's like with the Holden memorabilia. Peter Brock, who was a great racing car driver in Australia, the memorabilia went up after his death because people were attached to him and said, okay, I want to get that, and then the demand elevated for that sort of memorabilia. Okay, we're now going to move on to the next thing about TF2 item numbers, the concept of price fixing. If there is real-world goods, two companies agree to sell a product at a set price to maintain their profit margins. Monopolies, or so-called oligopolies, where there is only a couple of companies peddling the same shit, then that is supposed to be illegal. Okay. Now, basically, the reason why this is bad for an economy is it reduces competition, it can lead to upward monetary pressure on inflation, and can rely to the development of inefficient industries, which subsequently can become relatively unstable if other people come into the market later. And that's when people have had in Australia we had limited competition for a couple of banks, then we had the deregulation of banks in the 90s, and we had a lot of foreign banks coming in, but our banks have become fat cats and inefficient, and so it disadvantaged them, and there was an uproar, etc., because they were basically, to some degree, people would argue they were price fixing, although I don't really think we can, that's an opinion, that's not a fact. That's what we have to say anyway. In the case of TF2, we have Valve on one hand, with their prices on their shop. They have prices on their community market. They that to some extent is determined by what people want to list it for. But now you get some people who will just list an item which is valueless for $1,000 and hope some poor soul buys it of them. And you get people who don't know the true value and will relatively underlist them. But most people talk to their friends and come up with some sort of consensus treatment. So to some extent that is supply and demand and people having a go, I'm going to put it on the market and see what happens. And they're not under any pressure to sell because some of them don't need to sell. So they can leave it there and just hope somebody who is a higher tier buyer comes along and buys it. Marketplace is another example where people can list things for what they want. So it's a competitive thing, and people can say, well, look, I figure it owes me this much, or I want to sell it for this much. And then there's a more quite dysregulated but more vulnerable higher risk end where you might be able to sell your things a bit cheaper and trade, but you don't have the security of being backed up by PayPal and authentication and all that sort of stuff as much if you're doing trades, especially if you're doing trades for PayPal outside a system. If you're doing trades for items and keys, that's different because a trade is a trade and you've got verification and so on. I guess where price fixing comes into it is Backpack lists a price based on the recommendations of people that buy and sell all the time. That's like getting used car salesmen to recommend what price cars should be, or real estate people to recommend what price houses should be. Now, obviously, that's reasonable in some respects because they are actually experts in their fields, but it's not reasonable in others because there's this idea of self-interest. There's also the idea that some sellers or suppliers may actually be biased to the high end of the market or the low end of the market. Some are quick sellers, I want to get it and move it on, low margins. Some of them are, boutique dealers. And we have this massive difference. And so in some respect, Backpack should not be relied on solely as determining something's value. It's clearly, if you have an unusual hat, two unusual hats with the identical effect, both non-duped, and then you have one with two spells on it, the one with two spells on it, especially if I like those spells, I'm going to pay more for that than the other hat. Okay, if it has a professional kill streak, well, I'm probably not going to pay more because I don't really care about that stuff. I want the unusual effect of the spells because that's what I do for my loadouts. So it will be biased towards what the person wants, but obviously you're going to have items that are slightly different. So this sort of talks a bit about the prices of the market. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. The market has gone down before. The market has come back up again. You'll recall the time where the burning team captain dropped remarkably in terms of its value, and then it came up again. And there are other times when things have gone up and down. Initially, when Disco Beatdown came out, they became quite valuable at some stage, but then they devalued again as people became used to them and started to request the older effects or slightly different effects, and they became less willing to do that, to buy that effect. Also, another example is to see what happens when we have the Halloween thing. We have all these new unusuals that come out, and people think they're wonderful, so they buy them, the prices go up, but then they slump again. Look at Starstorm, Insomnia and Slumber. They were quite expensive items, and now they're relatively cheap. Well, I would say relatively. For some hats they're not, because that's, again, supply and demand. So I hope this sort of, I don't know if it reassures you, but gives you some sort of insight into what I'm thinking in terms of what might be going on with the TF2 economy. I still think it's relatively stable. I still think there's quite a higher base. I still think if Valve keeps on churning out things like the last Halloween update and making things interesting and getting the community's input with unusuals, new types of unusuals, I think it's a mistake to let people continuously unbox the same types. Maybe it's good to let some of the older unusuals like Burning Flames or Scorching Flames be non-unboxable, and now they're taken over by the energy effects and other effects. So I think an evolutionary of the type of effects that would reward long-term players of the game, and long-term by if they keep the old effects, they become more valuable, sought over after, and scarce with time. And once again, I hope this has generated some interest, and I welcome any discussion. Peace out.